Hi, I'm Matt Berry. I'm an independent filmmaker, and this is Low Budget Visions, where we celebrate personal DIY independent filmmaking. I'm joined today by Gage Clift, the director of a new movie just out on YouTube called Fool. Um, and I'm excited to be talking to Gage today because I've seen a number of his films that he's already released. And I really like the way that they tie in with the act of, filmmaking and film going itself. We'll get into that in a few minutes. Before we do, Gage, why don't you just go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hi, Matt. I'm Gage. I am a filmmaker, and yeah, I've just been making movies for a long time, and pretty much I guess half my life so far, which is a little interesting to say. But yeah, and I have a new movie out, Fool. So I'm excited to talk about it. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you for speaking with me about it because I've watched it twice now, and I think I mean, there's so much to talk about. It's the kind of movie I love because it deals with filmmaking itself and, memory, personal nostalgia, all these different areas. And I think we could go on and on about that, but I'll try to keep the conversation tight enough that we don't go off in too many different directions. But I wanted to start by asking you kind of a basic question about this movie, which is, how did it come to be? What was your inspiration to put this together? Because I have to say, it was clearly a film that brings a lot of your past work together. I'm just curious what made you feel that this was the time to do this and in this format.
Yeah, I do remember the time pretty vividly. I mean, this was we're talking 2021. I remember just kind of being in a weird hiatus of where I was at filmmaking wise. I believe, gosh, what was the last movie I made? I think it was me and my friend Kyle had made a little short called What It's Good For. We did that in like one night. Um, and then I was just kind of wanting, I was getting that itch to do a feature, and not even necessarily an itch, a little bit of an anxiety to do a feature, because, I had made a bunch of shorts at that time. I had been involved in feature films. I had written feature films, but I had never written and directed and edited and released a feature film before. And, at the time, what was I? I was 22, 21 or 20, about 22. I was just kind of feeling like it was time. So then it was this anxiety of what am I going to do? What kind of story do I want to tell? I remember just really not knowing. And then I just remember uh, I had always had these home movies that I had made as a kid, all these feature films that I would remind myself about when I would get anxiety about not having made a feature, or when I would feel like, oh, maybe I don't have it in me to make a feature film for myself. And then I'd be like, I'd have to remind myself that I used to do that as a kid a lot, and I'm just focusing more on quality now and all of these things. And then, it kind of just started sneaking into my mind this like desire to share all of those films that I made as a kid. Because I was so, you know, in a way proud of them, but also they're like really goofy and definitely embarrassing. And while I valued them so much, I wanted to share that, and I thought that, it's kind of just what a waste for them to just sit on my shelf and collect dust. Um, Even though I would still love them regardless, I just kind of wanted to share that with the world, and so it became this idea, this movie called, and the reason it was called A Fool originally was because it was gonna the movie was very different when it first started, but it was going to be about all of the old movies I made as a kid, but it was really gonna focus on the last one that we made, my sister and my grandpa, because the three of us made all the films together. And the last one was called The Fools of April. So I wanted to call the movie Fool. That title kind of the the themes and the ideas and the whole movie completely changed as I made it. But that was the original idea, and it was just a matter of can this be interesting to other people? And is it worth it? And no script, no structure. But anyway, I'm rambling. So that's kind of
Yeah,
the
well,
initial thing.
something I really have liked about your previous work, especially, and you'll have to forgive me because I forgot the title already of the film about working at the movie theater.
Yeah, a theater near you.
Theater near you. Yeah, okay. So one of the things I really like about, and that one in particular, is how you draw on this personal nostalgia and the personal events in your life. But I think you do it in a way that makes it kind of I won't say universal, but it's something that I think a lot of people watching the films can. Maybe it reminds them of their own experience, similar experiences, like a first job or looking back. I think probably all filmmakers look back at earlier films that we've made and think about how we've grown both, I guess personally and professionally since making them. And so I think that's a really interesting thing that you do. And then when I watched Fool, I felt like this was like the culmination of this approach because you have what was it, 10 films, I believe, that you uh, of your early films that you draw on?
Yeah,
The 10.
yeah.
Okay, yeah. And talking about working with, your sister and your grandfather and everything, and all the personal dynamics behind the scenes and getting into, you're thinking about your motivation for making them. It brings so much together. And what I thought worked so well about it was just how everything connects. It doesn't feel uh, disjointed. It doesn't feel like things are just kind of coming up and then being dropped very quickly. It feels like it really all comes together. And then, in the final sequence where you're talking about, looking forward to the future. Um, so yeah, I think that whole drawing on like personal nostalgia is something that worked really well here. Did you find when you were thinking about what films to showcase, what was your like cutoff point as far as what you consider your early work versus maybe more mature work that you've done?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, I guess not again. It's funny because I struggle talking about Fool a little bit because I've been working on it for so long. It feels like the whole world, like because I in my personal life, I literally have talked about Fool for 3 years. So I feel like I've said everything. So like when I start talking about it, I'm like, as you know, but of course you don't. Sorry, the question was, I lost my train of thought.
Oh,
I'm
just
so
what
sorry.
that's all right. I was just wondering, like in your looking back at your films, kind of
That's right.
where you draw that dividing line between the
Where
early
I draw the
and
line.
later work. Yeah.
Yeah, it was all made in the edit. Fool is was made on the cutting room floor, and I bring that up because that was kind of there's so many big decisions like that, and not even necessarily editing decisions, but like what I really thought the story was. Because obviously there is the story, but it can't all be a part of this hour and 45-minute movie. I have to decide to focus on this or this and not this. Like, yeah, there were versions of the movie in my head where I did want to originally include some of my more recent work, almost kind of go all the way up until the now. And there is obviously a little sequence at the end where I show like just very quick clips of like the more recent movies that I've made on YouTube and stuff. But it became clear pretty soon that there just wasn't time to do that, and that wasn't really the story I'm telling. Um, so I guess, and I mean, yeah, like originally in an original version of the movie, when I first started making the movie, I really thought the whole movie was gonna be focusing on those home movies that I made, or not home movies, but the films that I made as with my grandpa and my sister. Like I thought that was gonna be the entire runtime, and it really only ended up being like the last 45 minutes or so, or a 45-minute section of the movie. First off, because I think a whole movie just focusing all that would be boring, but it also just wasn't the movie it wanted to be. So yeah, I guess it's hard. I just the story really was at least in terms of the films that I've made, I just wanted it to be the story about me and my sister staying the night at my grandpa's house and the shenanigans that we got into. and how that really got me here, because obviously I'm not an award-winning director, but it's really interesting to see why I'm making films to this day, and it was telling, it was a great reminder as a filmmaker why I still make movies, for no money at all, and just putting them on YouTube and stuff, now that I'm 25, it's like sometimes I wonder, what I'm doing still chasing this dream, but making Fool definitely reinforced that. I mean, I've been doing that since I was 11, so it's like that was the story, at least in terms of the filmmaking part of it.
Yeah, it seems like it really captures your love of filmmaking and, like you said, why you still do it. And in a way, I imagine for you, it's fun to look, it will be fun to look back at this movie in the future, almost as a reminder of, why you're still doing it, why you got into it in the first place. And, it's one of the interesting things about presenting your early films this way is that it contextualizes it. And you know what I mean? You're talking about you're talking about the production, you're talking about why you got into it. So yeah, for anybody watching the movies, I mean, and for anybody watching Fool, it really gives, I think, a very clear picture of what these films mean to you. How what you've taken from them as you've moved on with filmmaking, and where you'll go in the future. There was a really interesting comment you made in this movie, and I wanted to ask you about it. I think you're talking with your grandfather, and you say something about how in the earliest films that you did, you were trying like anything you could think of, and then you felt like after a certain point, you found yourself. I think the word used was imitating
Mhm.
Tarantino. I think you put it that way. I guess we're his. Yeah, one of my favorite.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, did you? So in saying that, I mean, I'm curious when you look back on it. Were you aware of that at the time you were making the movies? And I guess as you're moving forward, do you find having that kind of really strong influence, is that something that can be kind of difficult, like when you're trying to when you're trying to really be original, but at the same time feeling that influence at the same time?
Yes, Full was an interesting experience, however, because I got to kind of lean into that a little bit more. Um, like when I first made Fool, it was I was using like copyrighted free music, and I wanted to be able to be in a festival of some kind and stuff. And obviously in the movie I use like it's got like a crazy soundtrack of all these songs that I do not own the rights to. But it was fun to be able to accept that that was a part of this movie because in a way a lot of it was this like um, emulating films that I love and primarily Tarantino and like the style and the soundtrack and everything. So it was very exciting and kind of rewarding to be able to tap into that again. It made me feel like a kid again, making Fool in a lot of ways, being able to, because, I spent a lot of time not doing that and making stuff with like, copyright free songs or, songs from art lists that are still they'd still qualify for festivals and not get struck on YouTube and all those things. Um, I but as far as still emulating, I catch myself sometimes. I think that my process, as a kid, it was always, yeah, copy, copy, copy until I stumble upon something original, and that was always by accident. And it was really telling rewatching all the footage, things that I didn't even remember stealing at the time. Like I can't even tell you how many things that I didn't include that were just from our films that were just straight up stolen SNL skits, and I now that I'm adult, I'm like, oh wow, we just were ripping that off totally. But that is what's so amazing about having all of those years of doing that, of making films kind of behind closed doors, because you get to forge and you get to like imitate and copy and screw up and make ugly stuff and just awful, awful stuff. But it's nice to be able to do that when you're young and when you're not like, you know, when you're not um, really taking it seriously and trying to like master your craft a little bit more and everything. So that's exciting. But I mean, these days, I'll be writing a script and I'll catch myself going, "That's a little Tarantino-y, Gage. Let's tone it down a little bit, pal."
Yeah.
But it also just kind of depends on what I'm doing. I think it's nice. Like I've kind of over the years, because I've written a lot, and that's where it mainly stemmed from, was the writing. It was like emulating that Tarantino, style was in the writing, and I think that really shows in like my first movie, Vine Avenue, for sure.
Oh yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah, since then I feel like it's developed more into like the Gage style, and that's something I'm also trying to escape a little bit. I think I have successfully, but I still lean into it here and there. I don't know. I'm trying to be just a little bit more unpredictable with my style these days and just kind of surprise myself. And I catch myself being influenced more by like Linklater and stuff like that. And so there's other things I have to be careful about. Like I'm like, okay, well, you want to make this romance, but is it just the Before trilogy? Like you gotta,
Right.
it's my style though. I kind of have to just start with some weird crumb of an idea that might be too similar to something else, and might also just be very bad, and just kind of refine and refine and refine and find it and find it and find it until the movie's done and now it's like something completely different. So
Yeah,
anyway, I
that
hope that
that
answers the question.
it does. Yeah, that kind of improvisational approach, I think, is really interesting to watch. And you mentioned the film. What's it good for? That you and
Oh yeah.
Was
Yeah.
it Kyle did? Yeah.
Yes.
Um, and I thought that was like a great example of improv. Because as I recall, it was pretty much the two of you. Just yeah, I mean, it was pretty much focused on just the two of you, right? From what I remember, it's been a while since I've seen that one.
Yeah, and that was the beginning of a new phase in my filmmaking stuff, which was the improv,
Yeah,
which is so, I mean, so out of my wheelhouse. And it was, especially at the beginning, it was a very forced thing. And that was something that kind of came from like the whole YouTube filmmaking stuff, was the improvisational, that it was very much so like, okay, I was starting to watch a lot of Joel Haver and really getting into his work, and I was really forced. I forced my way into that because I knew it would be really good for me and good for my style, because I'm always very like meticulous writing wise, don't deviate from the lines, all of these things. And now I've kind of gotten really comfortable in that improv style and I'm ready to do something different. I kind of just really um drive myself into a certain style and just kind of do it until I get bored and then move on.
yeah. Well, that's a good approach. You definitely can explore, everything that you can get out of that approach or style, and then take it with you to the next project and see where it goes. I was thinking about the film that you'd made, where you find the tape recorder washed up on the beach.
Driftwood or the Seashell.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. Drift. And I think that was such an interesting film, a really beautiful film, and the way that you had the
Thank you.
scripted monologue that you are, recording into the tape recorder. I was thinking how different that is from Fool, because what I remember about that film was, these really uh, very kind of deliberately, beautifully composed shots, the writing, and then see you go from that to Full was a really interesting change. And I don't think one approach is better than the other. They're just different, and I just think you did both really well. Um, one other thing about Full, I just have to mention, I thought the editing was really effective.
Ah,
The way you
thank you.
bridged everything together, both the picture and the sound. I mean, kind of going from the sound, the interviews, and then going back to the home movie footage or your early film footage. Um, I was curious about something when you were so obviously when you put this together, you had to get your old films together, get them ready to include. Did you, over the years, did you put a lot of, was that something that was on your mind a lot, about kind of archiving or preserving your own films and making sure that, that you still had a way to play whether it was playing the tapes or the DVDs or whatever? Did you find that was something, is that something you've kind of given a lot of thought to over the years?
I mean, it definitely was when I started to really delve into all the home footage and
Hmm.
all of my old movies, and I transferred them all to my computer and everything. It was this weird sense of relief, like, oh, okay, these are backed up at least in one aspect. They're not just all sitting on DVDs or VHSs. Now I have them on my computer. That's really it made me feel a lot better
Yeah.
about that, and it was an anxiety I didn't even really know I had until like until I had them backed up. I was like, oh, this feels kind of good. Now I feel like they're solidified at least for a little bit longer. But yeah, for sure. I mean, it's kind of why I want to like get like physical copies of all my movies at some point, just for sure. And then also during the process, having an SD card crash and just be completely wiped. Not of the newer footage that I was filming, but of like an old like camcorder that I had. And that was I had a it was really heartbreaking actually. I had like an SD card that had probably had the most footage on it from when I was a kid, and it wasn't anything. And this particular SD card actually didn't have footage from any of like the movies that we were making. It was all just like random stuff that I was filming because I had like a 3 year period where I was just filming everything on my camcorder, just like like I had a whole vacation where we went to like Disneyland with my family, and I was excited about that one because it was a lot of just like I thought that was the footage that was really going to kind of like emulate what it was like, being a teenager. And it was like that portion of my life being a teenager, and that went missing completely. And that was really sad. And since then it's like, yeah, I got to really double down on making sure I have everything backed up and saved, because if Fool is any really is any if it's taught me anything, it's that anything can be made into a movie. So I better save everything.
Yeah, it is definitely alarming when you see things like that happen. A friend of mine who has worked in video, like data archiving and stuff, he's told me about, some of these files develop data rot, where it's a digital file, and the
Yeah,
drive itself, I think, can still be perfectly fine, but it's just the data itself can just become corrupted through one way or another. So yeah, sometimes it feels like no matter what we do, it's always a race against time to keep the file formats updated, make sure we can still
yeah,
access them. And it gives me concern because I've got 8 millimeter Sony like Handycam, so 8 millimeter video tapes that I no longer have a way of playing, and there was always that concern
yeah.
about, well, if I play these back someday, if I found a deck or something to play these on, what would the tapes even look like? So at least with
Right.
digital though, you've at least got it. It sounds like you've got the files all in one place now, and we have ways of playing them. So
Yeah,
yeah.
the SD cards I do. The funny thing about the VHS footage,
Mhm.
I did the most white trash version of backing them up. All I did was set up my camera and like record my like VHS TV, like the box TV. Like in the
Oh yeah.
movie you can see the outline, but I wanted to do that because it was like stylistically what I was looking for. But the real reason was because I didn't know how to back up the VHS footage. But at least it's there. It's I
Yeah.
filmed. I just put the VHS in one after the other, recorded the TV in 4K. So it's there. It's not like I'm losing quality. It's a VHS. So
Yeah, and it works certainly within the context of your film. I mean, it kind of conjures up that nostalgic vibe of watching
yeah,
things on these old formats. Yeah.
and like you're
Um,
watching it yourself on a TV. It,
yeah.
it kind of
Yeah.
gives it that energy. But yeah.
Yeah. No, it's funny because I recently had to make kind of the difficult decision to purge a lot of old files of like outtakes of old film projects, because I just don't have the space to store everything anymore. And
Mhm.
I figured, these movies are done, they're signed off on, but then you get into like the question of the final project files, and that's what I'd be really worried about losing. But one of the things I think that's so effective about Fool is how you're really looking back, both at your own life and the films, but also how they intersect, how they become, like I think you said in the movie that they become the films themselves become records of your life at that time, the memories and things like that. And a friend of mine that I work with a lot, he actually just said something similar to me, that movies we make together, it's like it's almost more of a snapshot of the time that we spent making it. So I'm curious, is that something you find to be generally true, even with other films that you've made? I mean, do you find them to be almost like little snapshots or diaries of a particular moment in your life?
1,000%. Every single one of them. I mean, my friend Kyle, who will like hang out with me, there's like an inside joke where if it's like if it's past 10 p.m., I'm watching my old movies on the TV, and he's like, "Well, it's time to go. You're getting nostalgic, you know."
Yeah,
So, but yeah, I mean, like I can put on any movie I've ever made, and just kind of, it's like I'm right. I literally say this in the movie. It's like I'm just right there back into that version of myself,
sure.
and I mean that wholeheartedly. All the good, all the bad, and it's a lot of nostalgia. But like nostalgia isn't always necessarily good or bad. It's weird, you know. Nostalgia is a very complicated feeling and complicated emotion, and I find that so true. I find that so true. Every movie I've made, and now I've made a movie. And a theater near you was also that. A theater near you was a movie about nostalgia, and then I'm watching a movie I made about nostalgia, getting nostalgic for it. So it's like layered nostalgia now.
Right.
um, it's an emotion I really value, and it's not necessarily always a productive and positive emotion, but it's interesting. It's very interesting, and it does, and every movie I made is definitely a little point in my life. Sometimes a longer period of time, sometimes a little, sometimes a day, right?
Yeah.
And it's exciting, and it can be very sad, and it can be, but it also can just help you kind of appreciate where you are now a little bit too. How much you've grown, not necessarily as a filmmaker, but in life.
Yeah, I agree. It's interesting hearing you say all this because I have to say, I think I share a lot of your feelings on this about the kind of reflecting and nostalgia, personal nostalgia, and also specifically tied to films that I've made and how they can become like markers in your life. And I don't know, I imagine this is true for you as well, based on what you're saying. But I also find that when I'm just trying to think about a certain point in my life or whatever, I'll often find myself thinking, okay, what movie was I making like around that time? So
Mhm.
it even kind of works like in the other direction. It's not just that the movies remind me of my life at that time. It's that I'll kind of mark moments in my own life by thinking back of, what was I working on at that
Yeah.
point? When was this? Yeah. And of course, the other thing that I find is that thinking back on these memories, I'm often surprised how, in our mind and our memory, we can kind of compress time. Sometimes it'll feel, I'll look at two movies and I'll feel like I made them one, like back to back, like a month apart. And it's like, actually, it was a year apart. So it's interesting how time can get compressed and distorted in our memory that way. But I guess the films always help to set the record straight.
1,000%. And it, yeah, I mean, 3 years for Fool doesn't, I mean, it is long, but you hear about movies being made for 3 years a lot,
Yeah.
and it's not that crazy. But then I remind myself that, during the time I made Fool, I made Driftwood or the Seashell. I made a Singularity. I made a Theater Near You, and I made Manic. So I made four movies during that period of time that I was all working on Fool, and that blows me away.
Yeah.
That blows me away, and that makes it feel like, wow, it's been a long phase of my life.
I'm curious with the production and I guess post-production process on Fool, was most of that spent in editing, or did you find, or did you spend, I mean, I guess I'm just curious how much time of that was spent shooting like the new, interview style footage, and how much of that was just simply spent bringing this all together in post-production?
I mean, just put in a percentage, I mean, 80%, 80 to 90% was editing.
Hmm.
80 to 90% of it. But I was filming and editing chronologically. So the first thing I did was film the opening, and then I was editing and editing and editing. Next thing I filmed was, that first interview, and I was editing and editing, and and then I get to the point where it's okay, my sister's interview or my grandpa's interview. So it was all chronological. I was editing as I was going, um, more or less. There are periods of time. But I mean, I lost the original version of the movie.
Hmm.
I had edited about 35 minutes of the movie, and it was on an old computer. in an old version of Premiere, and it the my computer went bad on me. At the same time, the project file became corrupted, and
Oh,
so
good.
I started from scratch there. So there's a little bit of give and take in that aspect, and then I started editing again and getting up to the point where I was ready to film new stuff.
Yeah.
Like, okay, finally I get to film my sister's interview. I've been editing, the whole movie all over again, and so that was a little bit tricky, but
I'm,
yeah, I'd say
yeah, I'm sorry
go
to
ahead.
interrupt, but I have to ask, when you went through that experience of losing that first 35-minute rough cut, did that impact how you viewed, when you kind of picked up and returned to the project starting over? Did that play into how you were thinking about all this footage? I mean, I'm just curious. It seems like it must have had some impact. I'm curious what you found after that.
Yeah, that was I mean, keep in mind it took me so to edit and film 35 minutes of the movie. That was the first um about 2 years. And then the last year I re-edited those minutes and filmed and edited the rest of the movie. So not only did things become way more productive, the movie became better also. I mean, anytime I feel like any experience I've ever had or anybody I've known who's had where like they lose, the file or, footage or they have to reshoot or re-edit, it always is a blessing in disguise. It always, in hindsight, you're like, thank God that happened. It's so much better because of it. But I mean, it really, obviously, it was crushing when it happened. It was so crushing. And I did contemplate not making it anymore. Um, but, kind of creeped back into my mind and started to dabble with it, started to re-edit. That's when I had the idea of like, okay, well, I kind of want to start using like copyrighted music. I want to make this process more fun and more authentic to what the movie wants to be, what I wasn't allowing it to be. And at that point too was when the movie really shifted, and it wasn't just about, all the funny goofy movies that I made as a kid anymore. It was about a lot more. It was about my childhood, it was about my family, it was about the things that were happening in my life while I was making it. It was really a coming of age story. And so that really emotionally difficult situation allowed me to accept or realize what the movie needed to be, what it wanted to be, like I said, what it wanted to be. And once that realization clicked in, that next portion of editing and filming, still slow, still took a year, but much faster. Not only because I knew, how to get through those 35 minutes a little bit better because I had already been there, done that, but also because I had a little bit more of a vision, and I had more of an I I had more of an idea. I had more of an idea of what I was making, whereas I didn't that first go around. I was kind of just figuring it out a little bit more as I went along.
Yeah, I guess in that sense, it almost sounds like it was a blessing in disguise that it, forced you to revisit it and showed you this whole different perspective on the movie that you were finding as you went along. And I think that that process of improv is so important. It's so interesting. And it's one of the things I think that gets lost a lot in talking about improv filmmaking. I think a lot of times people talk about the improvising dialogue, strictly as like the performance, basically. But I think so much of the improv can happen behind the scenes and in the editing. And it's not like you're sitting down with a very carefully noted script and you're just making the edits that you've planned out shot by shot like a storyboard or something. It's like you're coming together with all this footage and letting the movie, it's almost like you're letting the movie tell you what it wants to be in a
Yeah,
sense. It's, like you said, you're kind of responding to the film that responding to what the film wants to be rather than trying to impose something on it. So I can imagine that's a very rewarding process with Full, given the personal nature of it.
Yeah, it was so rewarding, and I know you can relate to this. I know because you've dabbled in the improv and a lot of the guys um, making stuff on YouTube can relate to it, and I needed that experience. I needed it was the movie is so obviously just deeply personal, but there was something about just like you said, letting the movie tell me what it wants to be that was so freeing and so rewarding and spiritual on some level that I've never experienced before. I mean, I had so many just I wouldn't say out of body experiences, but I mean, late night editing, just getting very, very emotional editing this movie together because not only was I watching footage from when I was a kid and my family and all these things, but it was like the movie was just really unfolding before me and in a way that could never obviously scripting a documentary. I don't even know how you would do that, so there's a lot of improv that goes into the documentary format in general, but just the structure, and like what I'm choosing to use because I had so much at my disposal. I mean, just an infinite amount at my disposal, and just really just allowing and accepting um, what what was before me and what worked, and what was emotionally captivating. Just it was just such an awesome experience. I get excited talking about it.
Yeah, that's great. I'm glad to hear it
Yeah.
was like that for you. One of the things, because you mentioned, of course, this is a documentary, but one of the things that I've found myself thinking about when I watched it is how you're not restricting yourself to the usual confines of a documentary of just giving information or whatever. I mean, you as you said earlier, you're really crafting a narrative out of this, out of your life, out of these films,
Hmm.
and so it becomes to me as it's just as engaging and fun, and you're waiting to see where things are going. I think it's it's a very complex movie in that sense. I'm curious in making it if the idea of if you would ever apply the word experimental to this film. I mean, is it experimental for you? I guess is really the question.
Yeah, very experimental. I always struggled to call it a documentary when I was telling people about it in the early days because it is, but I didn't feel like I was making a documentary, and it's also a little like egotistical to say I'm making a documentary and they go about what? My life. you know. It's like a weird I don't know, I see it now as just a very experimental coming of age kind of story, where it is kind of just it's really like embracing the your life is a movie kind of mentality and yeah, giving I always wanted there to be this narrative element to this film even if it was a at heart a documentary, and I think some of that comes from the chronological nature of it, where like we're seeing all of these glimpses into the past but like there is like a moving piece going forward, and I even say a few times in the movie that like, oh, it's been this long, or it's been, I think I said that like once or twice. But yeah, I would say it was experimental for me for sure. But it also just became very second nature because I was just so engrossed by the process. Uh, again, of just letting time shape it, which is exhausting and a little frustrating, but very rewarding if you put in that time.
Yeah, it sounds like it took the time it needed, to get to where you
Uh-huh.
wanted it. It's yeah, it's not something that you can rush, not something that you can force. I guess it seems like you really arrived at where you needed it to be when it needed to come together. So, I think one of the most beautiful things about the film, and really one of the most I guess to me, just something that I know it's a very important thing to me in my own life and making movies is, your focus on the people who have been there kind of with you through this filmmaking journey, who have been there and supported you and been a part of it. I mean, specifically with your sister and your grandfather. And I think your relationships with them really comes through very, very clearly in the film. It's a very affectionate portrait of them and how they've been a part of it. And I think it's great that they enjoyed looking back on these films with you. I thought that was a really nice thing.
It was just everything, and it became not even it became something that I wasn't even really concerned with serving the film. Like, it was really serving my life, and I think that impacted the film in the end. I mean, I uh, I I moved out when I was about 18 or so, 18 or 19, and I was still close to my family and everything, but not nearly as close as I am with now. I kind of went on my own and did my own thing, and then, as you see in the movie, I moved in with my mom and my sister later. So this is like 4 years after I had moved out, and I just got so close to my family again, but also closer than I had ever been in my whole life. Um, and it was just so it was beautiful. I mean, it's a beautiful experience, and like, my sister is just like my best friend in the whole world. And I don't know, I just became so much closer with my family during the process of making the movie, completely unrelated to the movie. So that, like, by the end, I had made a movie about my family, but it was like it became so much deeper. And that was just so rewarding. And again, it wasn't something that served the film. It was just kind of happenstance, you
Right.
know.
Right.
And to literally be close with my family again, like physically, like living with them, changed everything too. Uh, and having my mom like help me sort through home video and pictures. I mean, I a very specific evening in mind one night where me and my mom were sitting on the floor in the closet, drinking and chatting and laughing and looking through old photos for the movie and everything. And it was just like, I mean, I can't. There's just nothing that I could ever make, I think, that could be as rewarding as this one was. I mean, it's about the love I have for my family, and so it's awesome. That's all I could say. It was just awesome. I don't even remember what your question was, but it was awesome. Thank you for asking it, because it
Yeah.
got me on this tangent.
No, that really says it all. And like I said, I think it comes through very clearly in the film. I thought it was one of the most powerful well, really the most powerful aspect of it, at least for me. I think the people who support us in these dreams and in these pursuits, they're very, very special. And I know from my own experience, being able to think back on that, it's always nice to see the people who kind of support us along the way and who stick by us, when it gets crazy with doing this. Like you said, sometimes it's easy to wonder why are we doing it, but I guess it's ultimately because we have to. There's just you had to tell the stories and get the images up on the screen. I'm curious along that same line. Do you think that this kind of documentary, personal essay approach to filmmaking is something that you're going to continue to visit in the future?
I could see somewhere down the line. I'm hesitant to, even consider that a possibility anytime soon. It's definitely, it can be exhausting. You know, making a movie essentially, where you are the main character and not
Sure.
you're playing the main character, but you literally are the main character. It can be like a lot. And I don't think so. But you never know. I'm 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 ready for something different now. And I think that, that makes a lot of sense. I'm
Sure.
just
Yeah.
like I said, I like to time for a little mix up of style, and ready for some narrative stuff again too. Strictly
Yeah.
narrative written, and so yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
You at this point, I think you said in this was really your first at least recent attempt into making a feature. I'm curious if you do you see, let me put it this way, do you see a distinction aside from just the conceptual, from a conceptual standpoint in terms of, how long the project needs to be, do you see a real distinction between, like shorts and features as far as uh, the purpose that they serve, if you see what I mean? Obviously, the length of the project is going to be the ultimate determining factor, but I'm just curious. I mean, for example, let's use Fool here. Do you think that you could have made this as a short?
I as far as Fool goes, I don't think. No, I mean, I could have made it as a short, but it would have been, it wouldn't be a fraction of what it is.
Mhm.
But that's also not like, I'm not a short versus feature kind of person. I I think it's obviously project based, and Fool, I mean, I always imagined Fool, I was like, if I could just break an hour, that was always what I wanted to do, because I felt like there was an hour of story there, and
Yeah.
I think that's where it comes from, is like how much story is here. And Fool, I always was like, okay, I think I can break an hour, and then it was, I think I can hit an hour 20, and then next thing the rough cut's like an hour and 50 something, and I only cut it down to an hour and 45. I it honestly was shocking that I couldn't get it down to like an hour 30. I was very surprised when I had just like accepted that. But no, I mean, like, shorts, features, I love making short films. I think from my own personal experience, the only thing I would like to change is, if I'm gonna make a feature or a short, I want there to be some kind of distinction. Like, I don't want to make any more shorts that push 30 minutes, just because at that point it's like, if I'm going to put that much time and effort into something, I would, not that I would extend it, like on purpose, like,
Right.
oh, okay, well, I'm just going to draw it out and make it an hour and a half. But um I'm just not at the point in my life anymore where I want to make like a 40-minute movie. Like, I want to, if I'm going to make a short film, I want to figure out how I can make it like under 10 minutes, and I do think that that is as valid as a 2.5 hour movie, 100%. I
Oh
mean,
yeah. Yeah.
I'm sure you're not going to watch shorts at movie theaters, on a Saturday night, but 100%, especially at our level, like short films. I mean, short films are how people. I mean, I look at Thunder Road as an example. I don't know if you've ever seen that, the
Mhm.
Jim Cummings film, but yeah, I mean, especially as a proof of concept thing. Oh my gosh, yeah. Uh, I think I'm gonna. I definitely think I'm still gonna make short films. I want to make more short films. I just think there's gonna be a bit more distinction between the shorts and the features, lengthwise.
Yeah.
I and that's just kind of own personal preference as far as my own, just kind of where I want to put the work in right now. I mean, I'm the king of making 30-minute short films. I feel like most of my shorts, I mean, are like 20 to 45 minutes, and
Okay.
so it's like, this is just coming from kind of exhausting that length of a film, you know. I'm just tired of it. But
Sure. No, I hear you. It's interesting what you say about wanting to work on either feature length or like a very short, like under 10-minute length. And I think there's a lot to be said for being able to condense the ideas, do it is, I guess, almost like the difference between a short story and a novel in the same sense of
yeah,
really being able to condense what you're trying to say down to its essence, kind of in that format. I was just curious because I've seen a number of the shorts you've done, and I think you use that format really well, and it's
thank
been
you.
fun seeing Full where you use the feature length format very well. I mean, I think the first of your films that I saw on YouTube was, I believe it was called Waffles. Was it?
Yeah, well,
Yeah, yeah. That was one of the first. That was. going back a few years now, and I love the energy of that movie. I mean, that to me was like a short
Yeah.
film that you kind of hit the ground running with that energy. And I think I said it, I think I said at the time, it almost reminded me of the early Scorsese films, and like very like kind of
Oh,
French
that's
New
cool.
Wave influence. Yeah, just like with that energy. So
Yeah.
I like that.
Well, thank you. And that brings me to another thing that I've been thinking about too, the energy aspect, because I remember making waffles, and I wanted to exactly what you said. I wanted to make a very energetic little movie, that didn't lose that energy for the entirety of its runtime. That was my goal. I remember. Um, and then when Fool came around, it was okay. Can I take that energy I did in Waffles, which is the best example of that energy I was looking for in my filmography, and can I make that last twice the time or three times the time?
Mhm.
Because it's intimidating, I mean, it was hard in Waffles. It was hard to make a, what is it, 24-minute movie, and have that same energy throughout, even though Waffles is too long, which is off topic. But but uh, it was hard in Waffles for, and I had 23 minutes. But can I do that in an hour and a half? And that was a huge goal for Fool, was that, one thing that bothers me, and this is a documentary specific thing too. A lot of not necessarily just documentaries, but it just films in general, where like they have a certain energy in the first 15 minutes or so, and it really like grabs you, and you're like so into it, and then slowly that energy goes away, and I just wanted to make a 90-minute movie that energy that you're promised in those first 15 or so minutes, 10 minutes even, it's not it's not a lie,
Yeah,
that energy is going to be there the whole time, and I hope I achieved that, but I at least really tried.
I think you did. I mean, it really, when I was watching it, I found that it wasn't. So I don't want to suggest that, I mean, I think the pacing is excellent, and I think there are moments where it's a little more reflective. There's moments where it's a little bit more kind of frenetic energy, but I do think that it's sustained enough throughout that to me it never lagged, is my point. It never
Well,
felt
that's
like,
good.
yeah, it never, or like it never felt like it was kind of hitting a slow spot or something like that. Yeah, so I think it worked. Yeah.
And even like when it does kind of take a moment to linger and reflect and stuff, I always wanted to bring it back really bombastically,
Yeah.
and I mean, for me it's all about, I just wanted to earn those moments of quiet. That was a really big goal,
Yeah.
so that when it does slow down, it feels okay. We earned this. We're gonna relax for a second, and it kind of amplifies the emotion that we're supposed to be feeling, the somberness or whatever. So
Right. Just, I mean, I know this is probably would be a long ways off at this point, but do you think it's possible that you'll ever revisit your more recent short films, or even films you make in the future? Do you think this might be something that would be of interest to you to pursue again?
it's definitely possible. I mean, knowing me and my personality,
Mhm.
it's definitely possible. We got to give it time. We probably got to give it a decade, but
Yeah.
definitely possible. I mean, I'm again like I get nostalgic for things that happened a month ago, so I could see that happening. I mean, yeah, that's another part, is like I focus so heavily on this phase of my life, particularly, and then obviously there was the. I mean, I didn't even talk about it. I did YouTube for 7 years. I mean, half 99% of my channel is privated. I made so many YouTube videos, like movie reviews and stuff. So that was another whole aspect that I was wondering if I should touch on, and I didn't. So it's exciting and a little unfortunate that I still have so much that I could turn into a new story if I wanted to. It just kind of depends. I mean, Fool was a passion project for sure. So if I ever decide it's time for another passion project where I want to reflect on my life, get a little nostalgic, maybe a little sad, you never know.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting with YouTube, because I was just talking with somebody about this recently, that when you start out making films and you have of course, these days, young, emerging filmmakers have that opportunity to pretty much put their work right out there into the world. And years ago, that wasn't really something that existed. If you were just shooting things on a camcorder and on VHS tapes or whatever. And I do think that's something that I find interesting to think about is what would it have been like if I'd had the opportunity, to put my earliest movies out into the world from the very beginning. How would I feel about those today, and the reactions to them? Because as it is, for me at least, those movies have sat on VHS tapes for 30 plus years. But it's like, yeah, it would have been very different had I been able to release them immediately onto YouTube. And I guess that's
Mm-hmm.
a whole other discussion. But I mean, with those earliest YouTube videos, do you find? I mean, you mentioned that you've set them to private on the channel. Do, do you feel would it be odd, like a strange feeling for you to make those public again, or it I'm just that's something I just sort of try to imagine for myself. It's kind of hard for me though, because it just wasn't an experience that I had.
Yeah, I mean, it's wonderful to be able to just put anything on the internet. Like the thing about Fool being a passion project. I mean, yeah, if I made this 30 years ago, like, what do you do with that? What do you do with a movie like Fool? I mean, YouTube is really the only outlet for a movie like that.
Mhm.
Um, and then, I mean, as far as like salvaging, like old stuff and releasing them and everything, I mean, for me, it's all about time too. I mean, privating all those YouTube videos. Uh, there's still some embarrassment there a little bit. Whereas like there is embarrassment for all those old movies I made as a kid for a while, but then like a certain amount of time passes where they're like they're sweet, and they're
Yeah,
like
yeah,
the embarrassment goes away because you're so different and you were so young and it's like okay. So that's also it's just time is so important with that stuff. You know, I don't know if that answers your
no,
question.
it does. Yeah, it gives me helps kind of give me an idea of what it would be like to have that
Right.
opportunity. It's
And not that embarrassment is the only thing
hmm,
keeping us from releasing any of those things, but it also just kind of the time helps with like the reflection and you allow yourself to grow too
yeah,
yeah, as a filmmaker and as a person so that you can look at these old things that you made and just really appreciate them for getting you there, getting you
sure.
here.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I think the distance of time, no matter how long we make films, that distance of time is a really interesting. It has a really interesting effect on how we think about them. Because there is almost that, like you said, there's that like short window where sometimes we might be, embarrassed by something or feel like it didn't come off the way we wanted or whatever. But then, it could be a few years down the road, a decade down the road, you look back at it and your perception of it is perhaps some of it is we're just, a little kinder to ourselves in retrospect.
Yeah.
That might be it, or like you say, just the sense of nostalgia that comes into play. That may be a part of it. So yeah, it's interesting how our own perceptions of the films can change, and I think certainly Fool is going to be a great thing for you to look back on because it's a record of how you felt at a particular moment. Well, is there anything about the movie that I haven't asked you that you would like to bring up, or that you would like viewers to know before they watch it?
Uh, Not that anything comes to mind. I guess
Yeah.
Fool is just it is my heart on a just on a plate. That's what Fool is, and it's the first movie I've ever made where I'm just like it is for me and my family, and I just hope other people can enjoy it. And if they don't, I am just so happy that I am so grateful that it exists that I put in the time because it's just so important to me. I haven't had a movie be that important to me, and I've made personal stuff before, but it's just so important to me, and I just hope other people can watch it whether they're other, whether they're filmmakers and they connect with that aspect of it, or if they simply connect to it on a, you know, on a basis of family and, childhood and growing into who you are. It is a coming of age story. So that's all I can hope for. Or they can relate to the nostalgia and just I don't know. That's all I hope.
Well, as I just to repeat what I said earlier, yeah, I think it's something that in this film and in a lot of you know in a lot of your work I've seen that aspect of nostalgia is something I think a lot of people can relate to in their own ways. So hopefully it will, it will be something they can appreciate what you're putting out there, but it also kind of transcend that and become something personal for them as well. So congratulations on getting it finished after all this time and getting it out there. And like I said, by the time this interview is published, it'll be available on YouTube. And of course, I'll put a link where people can go to find it. Do you have any other plans for the film beyond that, or any kind of screenings that you think you might do, or is it going to be just YouTube for now?
Yeah, just YouTube. I do have a premiere set the day before the premiere or the YouTube premiere. I have like somewhere in town that we're gonna do one. Mainly just family and friends, nothing
Yeah,
crazy. I should probably try to do more with it. I'm kind of tired to be honest, so I
sure.
might just
Yeah.
put it on YouTube and move forward. But you never know. You never know. But yeah, you can watch it on YouTube. It's kind of weird saying that it's out right now, but by the time you're watching this, it's out.
Yeah. All right. Well, is there very last thing? Is there any other projects or anything that you'd like to plug while you're here?
Well, my other movie, Manic, is out already. If by the time you're watching this, it should be anyway, Manic. So you can check that out. I made that like over a year ago. It was just a fun little improvised thing we did for the Marana movie, which you did as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you can check that out. Very different from Fool, but Fool is my main priority. Watch Fool. Fool's my baby. So check it out if you want. And I think that's it.
All right. Well, thanks so much for speaking with me, Gage. It was great to finally talk with you, and I'm glad to see Fool is out there. I'll certainly help spread the word, and best of luck with whatever project comes along next.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you for having me, and I hope everybody watches your stuff too. I love your movies. I love everything you're doing. I just feel like you're one of the most genuine people in this whole YouTube filmmaking, even just indie filmmaking sphere. So thank you for everything you do. Thank you for being so genuine and kind, and keep making stuff.
Thanks, Gage.
Thank you.